out, or can you hear me okay? Okay, we should, Dr. Downing and I are trying not to have a cramp in our neck for making this work. So thank you for your patience as we work all this out. When I first was in my interviews here about 3.5 years ago, one of the goals that was expressed to me in those interviews of the organization was to be able to live stream our talks. And so here we are today. It took a little bit of time to get here. Washington County Public Library, of course, sponsors our speaker series. We also worked with them to be able to get some cameras and some ability to live stream. You'll see our employee, Cardi, back there at the cart. He's going to be piloting this for us today. We're streaming directly to YouTube, but we're also recording it. Is that correct, Cardi? Did I say that correctly? Yeah. Oh, we're trying. Now we are. That's terrific. So there was an old YouTube page in the past. There's a new YouTube page, which is just Campus Martius Museum, and I'm going to send that information out to all of our followers, and you'll see it on our Facebook page. The old one was connected to someone's personal Gmail account, so I do not have access to that, so now we're creating a new one. The hope is that when the River Museum opens, it also has its own YouTube page, so we can be streaming different things to different areas. This we can also take for speakers that we have out in the main area. So we're really, again, like I said, we're just getting started today. I do have some old board members and new and current board members and some staff and volunteers who are watching today. A very safe audience, so that if something goes wrong, they're not yelling at us in all caps and exclamation points. But I'm certain my phone will be dinging as we go. I do, though, want to let you know, if you are here in person, coffee and water's in the back. You'll see that we've got a new cart for that. We do have some muffins from a meeting we had the other day. There's snickerdoodle on the left and pumpkin on the right. And if you're not here in person, you're missing those. If you are watching on YouTube, we hope that you will engage in the chat. Cardi is going to try to be reading some questions and monitoring the chat. We're trying all of this in a new fashion, so we appreciate your patience there. A couple of just general announcements about the organizations and what we have going on right now. Christy, back in the corner, put together that really great exhibit on the 1938 events. Hopefully all of you in here have seen it, and if not, please take a moment and take a look. It's incredible what people did in 1938 and when they came together without a cell phone or a GPS or anything more than a map. And then a bunch of ingenuity and cooperation and partnership. It's really pretty exciting. So that's out there right now. Certainly most of you in the room have driven past the Ohio River Museum. You're seeing that our piers are coming up, the concrete piers. The other day I was there as they poured the foundation for the elevator pit. I've never been so excited in my life to see an elevator pit. So all of those things are coming along. We should start to see some steel on site before the holidays. We'll see what the weather does. I'm just pretending it's going to be nice and warm from now until forever. But there's a lot of that's going on down there. You may have also heard, either through the grapevine or through my mouth, our organization has contracted to be the executive producer of One Vote the Musical, which is Larry Gross and Todd Burge's historical musical about Marietta. Yes, it fit with it. This is a project that fit with our mission. And it's just we're in a really good place to partner with them. So that will be, you will see One Vote the Musical somewhere in the region during next July. We're doing 5 to 6 performances. Details are all still forthcoming until the ink is dry on contracts. If you know me well enough, you know I'm not going to say anything until I know that's all there in stone. But it will be produced, and you'll see it on the stage next summer. So you'll see more from me on that. You'll also start to see our social media and communications start to branch out. So it won't just be, you might be used to seeing everything coming from Campus Martius and the Ohio River Museums. You're going to start to see Campus Martius Museum. You're going to start to see Ohio River Museum. You'll start to see One Vote the Musical. Yes, we'll get you in on all of that so you see it all. But for those of us in town, it made sense that we had one channel for everything. For people who visit us, that is not the case. We have so many thousands of visitors who we get a phone call, Christy can nod her head back there, 3 or 4 times a month from someone who is really interested in the River Museum. When will it reopen? We say, well, you could come and visit Campus Martius 1 block up the street, and they have 0 interest in that. So we're really trying to tailor our communications to those audiences that are coming to see us and that are interested in what we're doing. All right. So without further ado, you still didn't tell me how to introduce you. I appreciate, one more thing. We're starting to we have most of our speaker series set for next year. Just like this year, there will be additional dates, okay? So like in January 2nd is the first Friday. I think we're going to skip that one. I have another speaker coming in later in the month. In February, we have 2. In March, we have 2. We have another speaker next Tuesday, Veterans Day. That's Tuesday, right, everybody? Veterans Day. We're not finished with Lafayette yet. Ryan Cole is an author of a book called The Last Adieu, which we carry now in the bookstore, and he's going to be here on Veterans Day at noon. Now, we really technically don't open until noon, but we're going to open at like 11:30. So if you want to come to see Ryan on Tuesday. And then our final speaker of this year is Krista Horrocks from Ohio History Connection. She is the guru for Ohio cemeteries. She's really great. So she'll be here to talk about the cemeteries on, let's say that's December 3rd. I'm kind of pulling that number out of the air. Whatever the first Friday of December is, she'll be here at noon. December 5th. Thank you. I can't believe that's what we're saying is December right now, but yes. All right. So thank you all for being here today, and please give a great welcome to Dr. Brandon Downing.
We'll find out. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming today. It's Friday afternoon, so very surprised and very happy to see so many of you taking the time to come out here and hear a presentation on Native Americans in the Ohio Valley. I teach at Marietta College. I do early American history and public history. I focus mostly on Delaware Indians in the 18th and 19th centuries, and mostly in Pennsylvania and Ohio. So this is part of a research project that I've been working on for a while. And so hopefully it makes some sense. I'm going to do it from a public history standpoint, so I'll do a little bit of explanation there just so you get some kind of sense of where this is all coming from. So with that being said, then I'd like to, let me see if I can get this to work right. Maybe it's the other way. Okay. So I just want to draw your attention to 2 specific things I'll be talking about today. And I'm sorry if it's, I didn't know that it would be on this screen, so hopefully everything lines up here today. But the first thing is a historical marker that is found in Pennsylvania. It's the Big Spring Graveyard plaque here that is outside of McConnellsburg, Pennsylvania, which is about the middle part of the state towards the Maryland border. So it'd be like an hour and a half from south of Harrisburg and probably like an hour outside Shippensburg if you're familiar with Pennsylvania. And so this is what actually initiated the research project. And so that's where I'm just going to start here by looking about this. And this marker was put there in 1988. And so it's not so far in the distance past. And so I guess I'll just read through it because it's just a short plaque here. So among those buried here are victims of the Great Cove Massacre of November 1st, 1755. At present, McConnellsburg. The raid was conducted by Delawares and Shawnees led by Shingus, the Delaware king. Houses were burned and about 50 settlers were killed or captured. Its revelation at a meeting of Pennsylvania's Provincial Council, November 5th, 1755, led by Governor Morris, to ask the Assembly for increased frontier protection. So initially, reading down through that maybe seems harmless, but it raised 3 major questions for me. The first one was, why did this happen at a place called the Great Cove in 1755 in the middle of Pennsylvania? I was driving by, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. And then the second question was, why did the Delawares and Shawnees burn down houses and massacre the settlers there? And then the last question was, why did this raid require increased frontier protection from the Pennsylvania Assembly? So by looking at this, in these questions, it seemed pretty one-sided to me. The word massacre is a very loaded word, and so that's not in dispute, but I think you're just really getting one side of the story there. And that in combination with the second source I have here, which is a souvenir book from Selinsgrove in a different location in Pennsylvania, but also in connection with Delaware Indians. And these are just some excerpts from the foreword in the souvenir book. So the first thing that drew me to it, of course, was during a research project down in Philadelphia. And of course, the cover is very graphic, and it's pretty monotone except for this cabin on fire raging in the background. And then I thought it was also very weird that it was 160th anniversary. Like, who celebrates 160 years? Like 150 or 200, those things make sense to me, but 160. And then it's a souvenir book that's celebrating Penn's Creek Massacre. So I thought that was a little weird. So I had to open that up and take a look at it. And then the foreword's just a page. And so these were some of the excerpts I pulled out of there, just that we'll be kind of referencing today. So the publication of this, these are all quotes, so they're verbatim. So the publication of this little memorial volume, incident to the commemoration of Penn Creek's massacre, ought to have value because of its history, contains in its excellent illustrations, and should be increased interest in local and general history. We shouldn't remember the rock once we were hewn. So that's a quote they had within there. This massacre in 1775, obviously a misprint, because that's Revolutionary War, not 7 Years' War. So that's why you see this little sick there. That comes from the actual inside the book. Showed the necessity of a sort so well built and garrisoned that it could amply protect for a number of years a wide range of settlements and thus be a great outpost of Anglo-Saxon civilization. And then the third one here, such was Fort Augusta, which was built just down the river in 1756 at Shamokin, that's how they spelled it. Now Sunbury, as a direct outcome of Penn's Creek Massacre. The historic importance of the massacre is thus beyond question. It is for us who enjoy to the full what was secured by our hardy forefathers at so great a cost, to recall the conditions under which they and their descendants lived, fought, and died, to highly resolve to do our part in the life of our day with at least something fidelity. I think I can move that, actually, can I? Maybe not. I'll just exit it, sorry. What is it? Oh, equal fidelity. There you go. So we figured that out, and now I got to make this big again. So am I doing what? Current page? Okay, there we go. So just bring those back up there. All right, so I'm presenting these early on just because, again, these are the things that kind of motivated me to look deeper into this. So these selected quotes, which makes up most of the one-page foreword, again, raise questions that needed answers too. So like the marker, the language is one-sided. In both cases, frontier settlers were massacred by Indians, their sacrifices justified protection by the government, and both remembered or commemorated them as the victims. In history, of course, there's two sides to every story, but these are two very public historical records that is a little dangerous in a way because not only is it one-sided, but it reinforces the notion that Indians were bloodthirsty savages, bent on killing any and all white people living on the frontier, and their uncivilized lifestyle was incapable of organized political responses to the land and influence they lost in Pennsylvania since the arrival of Europeans on their sacred property. So that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to rectify that story. I'm trying to show the other side of that to better understand what happened there, right? I don't think you get a full picture. It just looks like there was a massacre that occurred there, and you have no reason why. There's no explanation as to why, right? There's no larger context here. So both of these are public history items. So whether we're looking at markers or we're looking at souvenir books, it's very important to rectify this because the way we think about public history is that how many people in the United States have a history class after junior high school? Do you remember those days? A few? Yeah. So some of you did. Nowadays, right, as they reduce more and more history classes from our schools, right, it's something around 70%, right, do not take a history class after junior high school. And that means only 30% are, so where are they getting their history, right? For the rest of their lives, right? It's not just like in your 20s or 30s. This is all the way up to your age. Where are you getting your history from, right? You're not getting it probably from textbooks. Maybe you pick up a book at Barnes & Nobles or something like that. But most of you are getting it from public history, the history that's available to you now outside. Whether, and there's a lot of examples here in Marietta, whether that is going to a museum, right? Or going to see a memorial or a statue, right? Like the Start Westward. Going to historical sites, going to archaeological digs, or going to historic houses, right? And so that's where you're getting your history, and that's where you're learning it from. You're not learning it from people like me. I'm in the classroom. I can reach students, but how many students am I reaching? Even on if you look at it on a semester-by-semester basis, or a year-by-year, or a career, I can't reach as many people as I do on these signs or these souvenir books. I can publish in articles, I can publish in books, which are not really accessible to the general public, right? So I'm very much active in this conversation, but it's not reaching beyond the people that are interested, like I am, academically with it. So it's very important that in the public history sense, that what the information that you're getting, even if it's just on a marker with just that much writing on it, it's important that in some way you get a sense of like what actually happened there. Because if you're looking at just what I've shown you, right, you're getting a very distorted picture of actual events, right? So not only is the word massacre dangerous to use here because it's a loaded word, and of course either side can commit an atrocity like that, but you don't know what happened there or why, or another explanation that could be possible. So that's kind of like what I'm looking at and trying to kind of reconstruct that story to better understand what's going on here and how to fix this, right? We are going through a period of time. I know that the University of Cincinnati just recently put up, over the last 4 years, they put up new signs across Ohio of, the Trail of Tears, right, that occurred among the Indians here. So I don't know if you're aware of that or not. So those are signs that they're put up across Ohio to better tell the story from a Native perspective as well. So I did a little bit of, just to prove this, I did a little bit of research. I found out that there are more than 130 historical markers in Marietta, Ohio. That means there's one marker per about 100 residents of the city. It also means that there are more than 40 history markers per history faculty at Marietta College. Plus, the markers are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 365 times a year for anybody that lives here or passes through here to read, right? And, Faith, how many hours am I available per day at Marietta College? Few, maybe, right? Not 24/7, that's for sure, right? So you can imagine how many people come into contact with that or pass through it. And although it might seem ubiquitous on the landscape that, they're everywhere and no one reads them, people do, right? In fact, they do. I walk around town, I can see people, passing by, stopping by, reading them. I know we have some signage up here for the Ohio River Museum, and I see people stopping by reading that stuff all the time. So, although it might not seem like it, people are definitely engaged with that material. And the same goes for souvenir books, right? They're physical keepsakes that preserve memories, celebrate an event, or mark a special occasion. It's a memento that can contain text and images, acting as a tangible reminder of a person, place, or milestone. The city of Marietta, in fact, has one of the most popular souvenir books out there, at least in my estimation. So I even brought it with me, but I forgot to take it out, right? You've probably seen this one before. You seen this? I guess maybe it wasn't that popular. I thought it was. It's popular to me. But this is an important one. In fact, this is my next research project that I'm working on. And this one is the Northwest Territory celebration of, this has the history of the Start Westward Memorial in there. And then this is the celebration of it. So it has all the kind of data and stuff in there. And this is one of these souvenir books that you can collect. So, people have this, and this is a copy. Of course, it's not the original. But, so why am I saying all this, right? So even though it seems like they're everywhere, and maybe they're old ways of looking at history right now that we have social media and things like this, but nonetheless, they can educate the public and are accessible to the public far more than someone like I am. So it's important that we get it right? And so that's a part of this project. So with that being said, looking at the fact that the majority of Americans are learning their history through these variable sources, right? It's important that we take a look at some of the stuff in greater detail, and therefore that's what we'll do. We'll just do a quick read, kind of a narrative here of taking a look of events that occur, and then think about how this looks so much different after you've gained some of this knowledge, okay? So we'll start off with a little bit earlier, right? So this is in the context of the 7 Years' War, right? Some you probably know is the French and Indian War, right? And this is the mid 1700s. So this is a little bit before that, and of course this is focused on the Delaware Indians. So 1737, we have this kind of long history in Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania, so we have this long history of William Penn and his dealing with the Indians, and it was called the Peaceable Kingdom and things like this. But he dies in the 1710s, and then his sons take over the colony of Pennsylvania, right? This is William Penn dies broke, and so the only capital they have is land in Pennsylvania. And so they have to find ways to recoup the money that they have lost through lawsuits and things like this, and that was to get more land. Well, the people who have the land are Native Americans. And so they conceived this idea in 1737 that they basically make up a fake deed and said that when William Penn had originally came here, that he had signed this deed with the Delaware Indians, but there was no record of it, and the Indians didn't remember it. However, because of this good relationship between the Delaware Indians and the Penn family, they said, okay, well, if you say William Penn did it, then we believe William Penn did it. And part of this walking purchase was as far as a man could walk in a day. So typically during that time period, that was probably about 20 miles. Right? Well, what happened is they got about 2 or 3 months before the actual walking of the purchase, that they got a few of the best runners in the colony, and then they cut a path through the woods so that they could run through the woods. And they got 3 of them, and they pushed them as hard as they could over the time period allotted. Instead of walking, they ran. Of course, the Indians cried foul. They said that wasn't part of it. And the Indians actually left. They were monitoring this to stake out the land, and they literally left. Right? They were like, this is cheating. You're not doing it right. And so they left. And what happened is that part of the deed was that they were supposed to walk along. So Philadelphia would be down here. This is Philadelphia. And then you can see this kind of windy line here. This is the Delaware River. And so they were supposed to walk parallel to that. And so, of course, what happened is that they started in Philadelphia. The path was cut. They ran, and 2 of them almost died. They had died from almost exhaustion. And so at the end of the day, they make it all the way out here to this point. And then part of it was that they were to draw the line back to the Delaware River. And they did. They drew it right back to the Delaware River. Right? Not in the line that they were expecting. Right? And so what you do is if you flip that over, they doubled. Right? So they've already cheated. They've already gone further than they were supposed to. And then they doubled it by drawing the line. So they just took the map, took the point of where they made it, and they drew the line that way instead of back to the river. So you can imagine, with that being completed, the Delaware were kicked off the land. Right? They had to leave because the Penn family was going to sell that land to make money. Right? That's how they were going to make money. And so as a result of this, you can imagine the Delaware were very happy about it, but ultimately they do agree to leave. This was their traditional homeland. Right? They had lived there well before any European had ever shown up. Right? This is where their spiritual homelands are. This is where they spent all their lives. The Delaware basically went from this, what's modern-day Delaware, the state, all the way up the Delaware River and all the way up through New York. That whole eastern land was Delaware land. And so what happens is this is a cutout. So this would be Pennsylvania. Philadelphia would be down here. And so this green part you can see in 1737 is the walking purchase. That's how much land they had gained in just that one day's walk. Okay, and so as a result of that, the Delaware actually split into 2 different groups. One will go up to what's near Shamokin, up in here into the eastern Delaware, and then the other group, which was the really angry group, they're like, got to get away from this. I can't handle it, and they moved the whole way across the state, across the Appalachian Mountains, into modern-day Katanning, which is just north, about an hour, 2 hours north, about 2 hours north of Pittsburgh. It's outside Butler. You should probably know where Butler is. That's where, well, I shouldn't say it. Yeah. So anyways, it's near there. It's very close to there. And believe it or not, when I was a little boy, because I'm from there, I'm from that place, which we won't say. And I was from that place, and I played Little League Baseball in Katanning. And that's where the Delaware ended up. And so it kind of makes sense that that's kind of where my research interest came from, where the Delaware. It actually is. And so they moved out to this place called Katanning. And as a result of this, right, there's a lot of prominent Pennsylvanians who made money trading with Indians, right? They're trading with Indians. That's their livelihood. That's where they made money. And so what do the traders do when the Indians leave? Well, they follow the Indians, right? That's their trading partners. That's how they make money. That's who they've been with. So this is not such a problem. This is in proximity, right? They can easily make it out there, and there are already like people living out there. There's already a place. But no one's living out here, right? There's other Indians living out here in the Ohio Valley, and traders follow them out there. But the problem is that Pennsylvania settlement has not made it to the Appalachian Mountains yet. In fact, they haven't even moved into the walking purchase yet. So Pennsylvania's population is all over here. The Indians move across the state, this is important, or the colony at this time, and the traders follow them. And the importance of that is because there's someone else there. The French, right? And so as a result of this, the French traders get very jealous of the English traders showing up in their territory. And because of that, they are going to complain to the commanding officer of the French army in Canada. And as a result of that, they get very concerned because they don't want the English in their land, right? The English are offering better goods at cheaper prices, and the French are losing out. So what they do is, as a show of strength, build a series of fortifications down from Montreal, down the Great Lakes, down the Allegheny, all the way to the Ohio, right? With the biggest fort of them all culminating in modern-day Pittsburgh at Fort Duquesne. Okay, they build that because of the intrusion of English traders into French territory, right? So that's to protect their trading territory. The English are rapidly moving across the colonies, right, into this area. So we know well, you should probably know, right? I mean, this is the story that everyone always kind of knows about. This is, of course, where George Washington is sent up because the Virginians are sending people into this area as well, right? Because they're already selling land. The Ohio Company of Virginia, right? Ben Franklin, George Washington, Governor Dinwiddie, right? They're all part of this, right? They're selling land in this area. This is disputed territory, by the way. This has not been surveyed yet, right? The Mason-Dixon line doesn't. Does anyone know when the Mason-Dixon line is formed? It's like near the Civil War. Yeah. So it's not there yet, right? This is disputed territory. In fact, Lord Baltimore claims a lot of this territory from Maryland. Virginians claim this. Pennsylvanians claim this. And so to get ahead of all of that, they're selling land in there, right, to settlers. And so they send George, because the French are moving in there. No one wants to buy land next to the French, right? And so they send George Washington up there to tell the French, hey, this land belongs to Virginia. You need to leave. And the French are like, well, we're building Fort Duquesne, so it doesn't look like we're going to leave. And, of course, George Washington goes back and tells the governor of Virginia, and so he sends out the militia, right? And then George Washington, on the Great Meadows, builds Fort Necessity, comes into conflict with the French, and the 7 Years' War begins, right? Soon after. But in the midst of this, while George Washington is fooling around at the Great Meadows, right, is that the leaders, I guess I brought this up a little. Oh, Albany Congress. Okay, so at the same time that this is happening, many of the colonial leaders are meeting in Albany at the request of the British government, right? The British had realized through the 1700s, through a series of colonial wars, that the frontier was very insecure. And they want to find a way that the colonies will come together, because they don't do that, right? They see themselves as independent of each other, to come together, to support each other, to defend the colonies against French and Spanish invasion, right? And so that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to go to Albany, and they're supposed to hammer this out. And that's, Ben Franklin offers his plan of union, which everyone rejects. But it was a plan to bring the colonies together under one government, right, to protect them from invasion from the French and the Spanish. And in the midst of that, which some people lose sight of, is that also during that time period, Pennsylvania officials negotiate with the Iroquois, who are located in New York, a huge land purchase across the state of Pennsylvania. Right? Becomes known as the Albany Purchase. In this map, it's called the New Purchase, but it's called the Albany Purchase. And they purchased this land in Pennsylvania, who belongs to the Delaware, and they negotiated that land with the Iroquois. Okay, so what this means is the Pennsylvania officials recognize the Iroquois as the overlords of the Delaware. And that was also true in 1737 at the Walking Purchase. So when the Delawares resisted to accept that purchase, they called the Iroquois to come down and force them to accept it. Okay, and the Delaware had no choice but to leave because the Iroquois are the strongest, the largest and strongest Indians in the East Coast. And so they ejected them out of the Walking Purchase, and so they left. And then to add to their misery in 1754, right, this entire green area, which is in this kind of red thing I made, didn't actually fit, but it kind of looks good, right? And it's this green area. And you can see it says 1768. Well, what happens is, and we'll come back to this, is that the Delaware, through those massacres that we began with, actually got Pennsylvania to rescind that purchase, right? And it was reduced from this to just this, right, through negotiation. So originally this was this whole green area was Albany Purchase, and that's Delaware land. That was not for the Iroquois to give away. So that's what's going on. And you can see the two massacres I'm talking about, the ones that I showed you at the front, right? Remember the celebration, 160th anniversary? Well, guess where Prince Creek is? Right? Remember the marker I showed you? Great Cove? Look where that's at. It's in the territory that was given away by other Indians, right? Not by the Delaware themselves. So you can say that already they're pretty angry about it. It's like someone cuts out half your backyard and says, I gave that to your neighbor. That's your land, right? It's yours to give away, not someone else's. So already you can start to see, starting to build up here what's going on. Right. And so because the colonies could not agree to come together, the result is Britain said, okay, well, we're going to take control of this situation because the building of Fort Duquesne threatened, right, British sovereignty of their 13 colonies. So since the colonists couldn't agree to some kind of deal, they sent over Edward Braddock, and he's going to be the supreme commander of all of North America. And basically what he says goes. Okay, so he lands in Virginia, and he's going to build a road all the way up, through Virginia, and then eventually the road will lead to modern-day Pittsburgh and Fort Duquesne, and then there's going to be a battle. So, he's coming over. This is the first time that England has dispatched professional English soldiers on North American soil on this scale. There had always been soldiers there, but not an army. Right? This isn't an army. This is like 3,000 men plus provincials and Indian guides and this kind of stuff, right? And so he's going to take his army, he's going to march on Fort Duquesne, but he's surprised in the process because the one thing that he refuses to do, which he's told by the colonists many times, including Ben Franklin and George Washington, is that you cannot march through North America without Indian support, Indian auxiliary. And he's like, we're British soldiers. We're going to march through the woods, that green and brown woods with our bright red uniforms, and let Indians hide behind trees and, kill us as we march through the woods. And that's exactly what happens, right? In fact, just before the battle, which, of course, he doesn't know is coming yet, but right before the battle, if you remember on that marker, it said Shingas, king of the Delawares. He meets with Shingas and Captain Jacobs, another Delaware leader from Kittanning. And they ask Braddock specifically, they're like, okay, if you win, what are you going to do with the land? Obviously, that's the most important question, right? And as you know from the title of this lecture, right, or this presentation, right, no savage should inherit the land. That's what he tells them, right? And so the Delaware join who? Not him, right? Because if he wins, he's not going to give them the land back, right? It's going to belong to the British, right? And so him saying that, the Delaware will indeed join the French in the 7 Years' War, right? And so you can imagine what happens, right? He marches up to Fort Duquesne. Well, he doesn't actually make it there. He makes it just across the Monongahela in a place called Braddock, Pennsylvania. That's where he's buried, right? And if you go to, if you go out there, there's this mural is out there. And this is Braddock, right? He's actually shot in the shoulder, and it travels down through his body, and it's a fatal shot. Kills him. Just because in European warfare, which is not going on here, but in European warfare, you're not allowed to shoot officers because they're aristocracy, they're royalty, right? Because you buy your commission, right, in these days. So it didn't matter how good you were as a general or a soldier, right? You paid the crown a certain fee and you became an officer, right? So they're all royalty and that kind of stuff. And so you were in battle, that soldiers, like regular soldiers, were not allowed to shoot officers. But Indians, the French told the Indians, like, hey, you're not European. You can shoot those guys on horses. And so that's what they did. In fact, George Washington had several bullet holes through his jacket and actually a scabbard, things like that. And so he survived. And in fact, George Washington will rally the troops to be able to get the British to evacuate. It's a humiliating defeat. But more importantly than that is what comes after, right? Especially when we're talking about the Delaware, right? So any Indian that was on the fence, right, with the French victory at Duquesne, they overwhelmingly join the French. And so that's French and Indian War. Right? Delaware and Shawnees are going to unleash their frustration and anger on the frontiers of New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. And there's no one there to stop them because the British retreat all the way back to New York City. They leave the frontier wide open. And so there's just frontier families who don't live in like large communities. They're in dispersed settlement patterns. So they don't, you usually have a field and like 3 or 4 miles away is like the next person. So what can you do to prevent an Indian from attacking you, especially whenever they are doing a concerted effort of doing that? So there's just very little resistance. There are some places where they have fortified houses and things like that, but they stand no chance with no protection along the frontier. And so they go undefeated. For the first 2 years of the war, the French and the Indians are going to attack the frontier of Pennsylvania, including those areas that I've already shown you and talked about, and they're unleashing their anger, right, and this kind of stuff. But it's more than that. It's more nuanced than that. It's just not anger. It's them going to be teaching the Pennsylvanians a lesson, right? And that's where we're headed towards here. So you can see it's pretty dramatic. By the first year and a half of the war, more than 700 settlers have been killed and captured. Those who do survive pretty much abandon all their farms and property and head back towards the East Coast, especially around Philadelphia where there's more protection, there's more people, it's safer, right? And then it also prohibits those frontier settlers from joining the British to fight, right? We know that there's going to be 2 Royal American regiments in the 7 Years' War, and which consists of Americans fighting for the British. But at this time, there's no possibility of that because they're too busy worrying about their families and their property, right, to engage with that. So even though the French are completely outmanned, they're completely spending less money. Their focus is mostly in Europe during the 7 Years' War. They're going to win most of the major battles early on because the Americans just cannot help, and they refuse to help, right, because of the British and their actions. So they feel abandoned by the English, and they become resentful of them, and therefore they refuse to help, right? So this opens up the frontier. And this is exactly, right, in 1755 is when these massacres occur, right, it's during this time period. Right, so that's the basic story. That's where, that's kind of where I'll end because that's enough information for you to kind of know where I'm coming from with the rest of this presentation. So I just want to take a look at some of the sources that I use to reconstruct these ideas that I have. And started with William Fleming's account of what happened at the Great Cove. He has a very telling narrative, a very descriptive narrative. He was captured early on. So he was like one of the first people captured because what the Indians do, they don't know who's who or who's where. So they'll capture someone and then they'll threaten them with death and things like that and torture. And they're like, you tell me where everyone's at. You show me where to go. And then that's what happens. William Fleming's that guy, right? So he's taking them to his neighbors and they're like burning the cabins and killing the people and and stuff like that. So William Fleming was their guide. And because he helped them, right, they didn't kill him. And so he lives to write the tale. His wife was also captured, and she was captured separately by different Indians and taken to a different place. And so they never, even though they were captured, they didn't meet till like 4 or 5 years after when they were actually reunited. So I use his narrative, which is very descriptive of the actual events that happened on that day, right? And then the same thing with the residents of the Great Cove were the Leroy and Leninger, the two women. They were both also captured, and they provide very good detail. And so if you put these things together, you can kind of reconstruct. They're not, right? It's not that they know each other, whatever. They didn't collaborate. They wrote separate accounts. They were separated during this time period. So by looking at their accounts and reading through it, you can really reconstruct the events that happened there. Right? These are sources that are of people that experienced it. Right? These are firsthand accounts, and so they're very useful in thinking about what happened here and how to describe it. All right, so captivity narratives. Of course, you have to be careful. Right? These are written by non-native people. And they were illegally squatting on territory, and they were enemies of both Indians and the provincial government. They lost friends and family in the attacks. They suffered traumatic experiences, and obviously they were extremely biased and angry at the Indians. So that comes out in these narratives, but you can filter through that and match up where they're similar and get a better account of what happened. And if you put that together with a newspaper of the time period, a very famous newspaper this time that was very popular was the Pennsylvania Gazette. That's, of course, Ben Franklin's paper. And there are numerous accounts over the rest of the year. So essentially, they don't happen at the same time. They happen a couple months apart, as you can see, right? October, November, so about 2 weeks, I guess. And this will dominate the papers through the end of the year. There are weeklies. They only come out like on a Thursday. So they're like these big papers. They're usually like 4 pages long, and they're pretty much the same the whole way through. So they'll have like international news, and then like local news, and then the back of it's like ships that arrived in Philadelphia and the products and what's for sale and advertisements and stuff like that. So usually these stories are just like a paragraph, something like that. But when we get into like October, November, it's like the whole paper. Right, they're talking about this. And so news is filtering in. Typically on the frontier when an event happens, like neighbors that are miles away, they show up after the fact. And so they're quickly recording what they see, what they think, and they're sending that to Philadelphia, and they're publishing it like, as quickly as possible. So, if you just kind of like read through those over a long period of time, the facts begin to reveal themselves, right? And then you couple that with the narratives of the people that were actually there, you start to think about what actually happened. Oh, I just wanted to read through there then. Right, let me go back there. So just some of the language is important too, right? The way they describe things. So this is one thing I loved about early American research is how they write about things and the words that they use and say. So that's why I always put quotes and stuff up there, just because they're very vivid in how they write. The French and Indians had actually massacred and scalped a number of our inhabitants and found no less than 14 bodies shockingly mangled. And this is also important in terms of understanding the native perspective. So just keep this in mind as we move forward. So again, 14 bodies, mostly shockingly mangled. And then later, right, the Great Cove, Penn's Creek happened first, and then the Great Cove in the county of Cumberland are destroyed. The houses burnt, and such that the inhabitants could not make their escape, either slaughtered or made prisoners. So doesn't sound good, right? Another source here is Pennsylvania did a great job of like recording all the colonial records of the government. So there's the Pennsylvania Archives, and then there's also the Provincial Council of Pennsylvania, the minutes, and so you get really detailed accounts from the government just trying to talk about what's going on, deciding what to do. Right, you can see there's a very frantic pace to all this. It really picks up at the end of the year, and so again. Just to kind of get a sense of what's going on here. An estimated 90 native warriors entered the valley, burning 27 farms, slaughtering an untold number of cattle, killing or capturing 47 people. A search and rescue party arrived to find an elderly lady with her breast tore off and a stake run through her body. A few weeks later, a relief party responding to gunshots and blazing farm buildings came across 4 native warriors sitting on top of children, scalping them with nobody there to protect them because all 6 members of the town watch were already killed and scalped. They also found a dead mother and her son scalped the next day. In total, another 15 men, women, and children were found killed, with numerous other taken captive. Those who lived within 10 minutes and survived the attacks abandoned their homes and moved east. So it would be easy to read this and think, man, they were savage Indians, right? They were uncivilized. They did these horrible things, and they're writing about it. And this is what they saw, and this is how they felt about it. So obviously, it would make sense. Like, where does that trope, that racist trope, come? That they're savage Indians. Well, it sounds true here. So a couple things I want to point out, right, is that this quote here: elderly lady with her breast tore off and a stake run through her body. So when I read that, I think, like, what's the purpose of that? Like, why would you do that? An elderly lady, is she resisting, right? And if she was, why so dramatically, like, just disfigure her and run a stake through her body? That seems pretty, like, planned out and pretty wretched. But we're going to find out that there's actually a reason for this, right? Because my explanation for this comes down to this idea that I have of performative violence. So I'm going to explain that, and I'm going to define it, and I'm going to show you how this fits into that idea, okay? And then also here, those who lived within 10 minutes and survived the attacks abandoned their homes and moved east. So another argument I'm going to make is that this is a political response to what has happened to the Delaware since 1737. And so if your goal was to remove white people from your territory that were not allowed to live there, and the colonists themselves were saying this, does this sound like a successful raid or a failed raid? Right? Doesn't it seem like they got what they wanted? So when we're reading this is called, when you're reading this, is Native Americans they were an oral culture. They didn't write stuff down. So we don't have this kind of data to look at for Native Americans. Right? So how do we find out what they're thinking? How do we figure out what they're saying? How do we find out what their motivations are? Right? So we have to find that within the documents that we have. Right? And so reading this, it's easy to pass over that, but in actuality, the colonists themselves are telling you what the Indians are thinking and doing. Right? You've got to read what's called against the grain. So even though it seems like they're just reporting what they're seeing, by reporting that and flipping that around, you can actually get an idea of what the Indians were trying to accomplish. Right? And it speaks volumes. So even though you might read through that and get sick to your stomach or think, like, why in the heck would they ever do something like that? That's actually, they are actually explaining to you very clearly what's going on, right? What the Indian motivation is. Right? So here, translation, kind of what I came up with. So the disfigured bodies, chopped limbs, scalped heads, and bashed brains, which, by the way, I could have given you many, many examples. We don't have time to go through all of them, but just read through the literature, and you'll find this all the way through those couple of months. So I just condensed it down into this conclusion. Disfigured bodies, chopped limbs, scalped heads, and bashed brains. Those are all their words, by the way. Prominently displayed in burned-out houses or barns or near slaughtered farm animals were staged. Staged. Right? Why would you do that? It's staged. Right? It's staged. For those who found them to incite the greatest amount of fear and terror. When you read that, it sounds pretty scary, right? Message sent. Right? Message sent. Amount of fear and terror with the intention of pushing white settlement out of the recently acquired territory that was sold without permission from the Delaware. So what is this then? What is this idea of performative violence? Right? This is a way for me to recapture the native voice, to recapture what the ideas were, to better understand when we say all the inhabitants massacred in a place. What does that mean? Well, if we recover it through this idea of performative violence, using the words of the people that saw and experienced this, we can actually figure it out, right? So performative violence, the way I define it, is a mode of communication through which Delaware sought to effect political transformation by staging symbolic confrontation. What does that mean? Well, this conveys a specific message by staging a symbolic confrontation, which I gave you an example. What the audience understands about the violence is the message of the performance. So performative violence, think about performance. This is a performance. This is like a staged event, right? This would be no different than going to the theater, right? Because when you go to the theater, you watch a movie, they're sending you a message, right? And that's your job to watch the movie, get the plot, right, and all that kind of stuff, and figure out what the message is of the movie, right? This is the same thing. And I'll show you how I come to that idea. Okay? Used to frighten and demoralize adversaries with sudden and dramatic acts of deadly force in order to reshape minds and reorganize society. All right? So they had lost their political agency in Pennsylvania. When William Penn was here, and early in that European experience, the Delawares were equals to the Quakers. They saw themselves as equals, right? They were asked. William Penn bought their land. Indians made them do that, right? Their rituals in terms of understanding treaties, Indians conducted those and those ceremonies. And the Quakers had to adopt them in order to negotiate. However, after 1737, that no longer existed, right? They lost land out of trickery, 1737, right? They were tricked, and then they were undermined by the Iroquois, and then land was negotiated away. They weren't even invited to Albany. No one was there. They had 0 representatives. It was a conversation where the Pennsylvania officials and the Iroquois didn't even think of asking the Delawares' point of view. It was just sold out from underneath them. So you can see they've lost that political agency that they've had in the colony. They can feel it slipping away. They're losing their land. They're getting pushed out. Right? They no longer belong in Pennsylvania. They feel, right? So this is a way for them to regain that, to show Pennsylvania they are still actors, political actors in Pennsylvania. Right? So a big part of this then is how do you prove it? You can say it, right? But how do you prove it? How do you know that it was a staged event? How can I take that information and say, well, that's what actually happened? It wasn't just an atrocity or a massacre. It was staged. It was intentional. Well, we can do that by actually looking at Native culture, their ceremonies, and their rituals, right? So to this idea of performance, performative violence is what is that backs this up is ritual, right? They have ritual. So ritual here defines the logic and meaning that both the militants and their audience draw from the violence. So in other words, right, they're performing, and this is how you understand it. So they're sending a message that you would understand. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to translate it. You see it, and you know what that means. When those people were reporting what they saw, they knew what that meant. Right? They knew what that meant. They understood it. Right? So there has to be some logic behind it. Right? It wasn't they did something weird or strange that no one knew before, and then hey, figure that out. Right? It was something they knew, something they understood. It was a clear message. Violence combined with ritual makes the performance more nuanced. It demonstrates a carefully constructed, deliberately articulated, and practical form of discourse, which is different than other forms of violence. I'm still working through defining this in terms of differentiating that between terrorism and things like that, because there are some similarities, but I need to be clear in that. So that's something I'm working through. But it is definitely different than other forms of violence, and that's why we call it performative violence. And this is something that exists within historical literature, and I think also anthropology, and if I'm not mistaken, archaeology, maybe. Yeah, I think, because that's actually where I got it, from archaeological papers. So from Indians from far before. And by the way, and I don't have this on here, but the Delaware were known as peaceful people. They were called the grandfathers. And so whenever you needed to negotiate something with other Indians, they went to the Delaware to have them be the arbiters, right? They were the ones who negotiated. They were the ones who kept the peace. Now, it doesn't mean the Delawares didn't fight. Of course they did. But the reason why we call it the peaceful kingdom, the reason why it's Penn's holy experiment, and why we say they had a great relationship with the Indians, had nothing to do with the Quakers. It had everything to do with the Delaware, right? They didn't have those large battles like the Powhatan Wars in Virginia, right, or the Yamasee Wars in South Carolina, or Metacom's War, right, up in New England. Pennsylvania never had any of that. And that's not because of the colonists, not because of William Penn. It's because the Delaware didn't want it. They didn't do that. That's not what they did. They were the peaceful, right, holders the arbiters, the ones they called the grandfathers, right? So with that being said, it's a pretty alarming situation when the Indians do go to war, the Delaware go to war, or they perform this type of massacre or something. And by the way, in the early settlement of Pennsylvania, when the Dutch were here, well before William Penn, the Delaware did the same exact thing, and it's all recorded by the Dutch. It's almost identical. You can almost put them side by side, and they say the same exact thing. It was performed, right? And then we have an example to draw from because it actually happened before, right? Before the Quakers appeared in Pennsylvania, it happened with the Dutch. Down on this, below Philadelphia, they tried to build a plantation, which the Delaware did not give them permission to do, like a big farm. The Delaware said, you cannot have that, you cannot have that land. The Dutch went down and did it anyways. A week later, Penn's Creek. Same thing. So ritual, where do we get ideas about ritual? Well, here's John Heckelwelder. He lived among the Delaware for about 15 years. He phonetically translated their language, right? And he studied them, he observed them, and he is our greatest source of what Delaware life was like among the Delaware, right? He recorded all this. He lived among them for a long time. And so he actually records this, right? So here's a passage from his book about the Delaware. During the war dance, so this is a ritual, this is something they're performing, right, amongst themselves, right, is important. It was to strike terror in the beholders by wearing distinct clothing and conspicuous body paint in a manner suitable to the occasion, such as land being taken away from you. The warriors dance as if their motions and actions are engaged with the enemy and compete to better the other warriors with their terrific looks and gestures. While they hold the murderous weapon in their hand, as they dance around a pole that represents their enemy, a warrior contemptuously looks upon the painted post with whom he was about to engage, and he strikes, stabs, grabs, pretends to scalp, to cut, to run through. In other words, the warrior demonstrates to others what he would do to a real enemy if he had him in his power. They typically perform this violence when they capture a prisoner, and as they dance to make him undergo every kind of torture previous to putting him to death. It's almost the same language the colonists were using when they came to Penn's Creek and the Great Cove. It's almost the same language that happened when the Dutch tried to plant a plantation or form a plantation down in southern Pennsylvania. It's the same language that we see. And by the way, none of these things are connected. It wasn't like he was reading what the paper wrote with the Dutch settlement. And it wasn't like he was there. He wasn't at the Great Cove. That's language written by them in the newspapers. It's almost identical. Right? So as a result, violence, oftentimes, as I presented to you early on, right, is that it's usually equated with racial, ethnic, or cultural conflict, which is how most people would read those signs in the brochure that I started off with, between native and white settlers, or as a romantic struggle of independent frontier families, right, hence the victims, right, against savage Indian warriors who were bent on destruction, murder, and kidnapping. Right? That's the old way of looking at things. So instead, Delaware performative violence was a way to reorder the world in which they lived by reshaping settlement, initiating negotiations for loyalty, and redefining frontier political relationships, all things that they had lost in the previous 2 decades. Intersecting Delaware violence with ritual provides a more nuanced way of assessing the fundamental complexities of indigenous sources written by non-natives. So we can find what they're trying to do by looking at actual sources not written by native people, right, that do not reflect the entire context of cultural meaning. As a result, an appreciation of the distinctive nature of that performative violence played out during the 7 Years' War helps create a more balanced narrative of Pennsylvania history more broadly. So you see, it's not that I'm trying to erase the word massacre, it's that I'm trying to give you the other side of the story. Right? So in conclusion, performative violence, as I'm using it in this situation, stage symbolic attacks, as you saw in the example, a specific people, the people living in territory lost to them by being undermined by the Iroquois and the Pennsylvania authorities, to acquire, reclaim, or maintain authority over settlers in the provincial government of Pennsylvania. It also used as a language of diplomacy, as you saw, not from the Indians, from the settlers themselves, right, and meaning-making to achieve their political demands. This language of violence was used to resist the invasion of foreign empires and settlers onto their homelands, forced negotiation on their terms. I showed you the map of where the land purchase was changed back. Remember all that land they lost and then how it was pushed back? Right? Forced negotiations on their terms to successfully protect their autonomy and most effective means of communicating their political grievances, because there's a handful of Delaware Indians and there's millions of frontier settlers, right? And so that was an effective way of communicating that. Oops, and so that's the Great Cove graveyard today. So if you go there, some of those people that died, they're still there, right? Their headstones are still there. So, thank you. I hope it made sense. I'm still working on it, but I'm more than happy to take any questions on that. If you're, yes, sir.
I just have one question.
Sure.
Could you explain on the map that you showed where they did the walking?
Mm-hmm.
What was the last purchase of 1874?
1874. What was that? Yeah, so that's also going to be an Iroquois cell later on, 1784. So basically, one of the most interesting periods, actually, for me, for American history, is the interwar period between the 7 Years' War and the Revolutionary War. And a lot of that was in the Ohio country, in this, what becomes the state of Ohio, right, with the Fort Stanwix Treaty, right, pushing the boundary after the 7 Years' War is called, right, the Proclamation Line. And that's going to be renegotiated with just the Iroquois and not the Delaware again. And so they keep pushing that line further and further west. And of course, that pushing of the line of the Fort Stanwix Treaty is also what pushes the Ohio Indians, not just the Delaware, but all the Ohio Indians, onto the side of the British, because they just see this constant pushing westward of land. But this one itself, is made by the. There's quite a few of these land purchases immediately after the Revolutionary War ends, and before the. That's made with the Pennsylvania government, not the United States federal government. 1874? Oh yeah, 17. Yeah, I'm sorry. Is that what you were asking? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. No, there's. I'm sorry. I didn't catch that. My bad. I'm trying to explain it as if I know. So. Yeah. Much earlier. Yeah. Sorry about that. It was different space.
You mentioned the Shawnee early,
Mm-hmm.
but not again. Were the Shawnee allied with the Delaware as they pushed back against the
Pretty much. The Delaware and Shawnee lived amongst each other. The Shawnee are known as they existed from Tennessee all the way in Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania. They were like movers and shakers. They lived amongst the Cherokee. They lived amongst the Delaware. And then once the Delaware move into the Ohio Valley, when they're pushed further back into Ohio, the Shawnee are there. And that's part of Lord Dunmore's war, and the Fort Gower resolves were with the Shawnee. So the Shawnee were still belligerent, right? But the Delaware had resisted that. The Shawnee had asked the Delaware to join them in Lord Dunmore's war, but they refused. And so the Shawnee were kind of left out to hang out to dry by themselves. And they were forced then to sign a treaty that basically formed modern day, the borders of modern day West Virginia. It's still part of Virginia, but what we think of West Virginia, because of that. But they're there. I just focus on the Delaware. But the Shawnee there's been some really good books recently come out on the Shawnee, but they're different, separate people, But they're closely aligned.
Was the massacre of the Wyoming Valley taking place at the same time?
It comes later, right? Early in the Revolutionary War. In fact, it was one of the worst. Heads were chopped off and place in circles and ceremony. Yeah, so that all comes a little bit later. It's pretty gruesome too. And that's whenever I think maybe like that started with like the death of T.S. Kung, I think, the Eastern Delaware leader. Like they burned down his cabin. And that was part of the Yankee Pennamite War, I think. It was all around that time frame. I mean, but it comes later.
Isn't it fair to say that, you've been focusing on Native American performative violence?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it fair to say there was a lot of performative violence on the part of settlers and Europeans too? Mm-hmm. It went both ways, right?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Is I'm not trying to erase the word massacre. Like it could have been performed by either side, but I think what the reason for this is that we have explanations for the settlers, right? We have documentation, we have that, but we don't have that for Native Americans. So it's not that it didn't happen. It's just that it hasn't been as deeply uncovered as for the Native Americans. So that's kind of really. We don't use that word language for performative violence for settlers in general, but could we?
My point really is that you can take these terrible things that are described and say, like you said, yeah, this is savage behavior. These people are savages. But very similar behavior was conducted by the other side.
Yeah, and I think
Native.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the big difference here, though, is that starting in the 1750s, is that not only the Indians but also the Penn family and Pennsylvania officials, they had been going into these areas, which was beyond land purchases by the government. And of course, they had their own selfish reasons for doing that, because the Penn family didn't want to see those squatters on their land either, because they're losing money. And the Indians didn't want them on there because the Indians thought it was their land. So, there's some collaboration there between like the Delaware and the Pennsylvania government to kick them out. So there are times when they go to these settlements and they arrest the people, remove them, imprison them, and burn down, their property and whatever else is remaining. And so I think, I don't know where that fits into this, but there's like Native Americans that are proactively trying to regain what they lost, where the settlers are trying to gain what's not actually theirs. Not meaning it's right or wrong. I mean, this is not like the only case where this happens, right? This is up and along the frontier for the next 100 years. So yeah, I mean, there are ways that settlers express themselves that are known messages as well. Sure, it's kind of an open field, but I think it's a way to just recover the native voices, which is what we're trying to do here, essentially.
What about scalping? 'Cause I've heard that wasn't a natural thing that the Indians did. That that's something
That was introduced by settlers.
yeah.
Scalping was I know that I've read those articles, and scalping was a part of Native culture. It wasn't, but there are right. I mean, there are situations that where we don't know, right? It's something because Native people don't write it down, so we don't know if it was something that was originated by Native people or it was introduced by Europeans or some combination of. And I'm talking about in general, and that's not scalping, but we definitely have some. Confusion about whether this was like an original Native American thing or whether it was introduced, or because Native Americans are very flexible. They take what's very beneficial to them, discard whatever's not. That's all the way from cultural to politics, whatever. So, I would say that's because if we look at their spirituality, that is something that's been recorded by Europeans since their arrival in North America. So I would say it's probably a Native. But I have seen those. I know what you're talking about.
Sources.
Oh yeah, so that as you could see, right there are I'm talking to you as if you're David, but they take on his persona. And so that's what we cross-reference, right? So, more so than that. So you have provincial records, right? You have captivity narratives. You have newspaper accounts. You have personal correspondence. You have families writing about this later. You have county histories, and so you have to wade through all that to see where things match up and things, right, are where they're fabricated, or where you can make some sense of it as if it actually happened. So, looking at the language, looking at the timing of events, what's been recorded, it's just like cross-referencing and making sure that you're not just using one source and saying that's the fact, right? You're looking at multiple sources to prove that that's a fact. Especially for Native Americans, right? Because you're not, Native Americans have different ways, right? We have to gain that information from non-native sources. So that's why we have to constantly kind of work those back and forth.
I'm curious, in Pennsylvania, have any plans to rewrite any of those markers as historical markers?
Not that no, yeah, not that I'm aware of. But I know that there are a lot of projects going on right now because in terms of like kind of rebuilding the Delaware presence in Pennsylvania, because there is some conflict. And I think what is a barrier to some of that, perhaps, is that there's the official Delaware nation in Oklahoma, but then like there's this kind of other official Delaware people in Pennsylvania, and they don't collaborate very well together. So where that's not usually the case for a lot of Native people, it is a case for the Delaware in Pennsylvania. And so I think that's perhaps maybe one of the barriers that they have to overcome before they could maybe go through that process, is they need to kind of work that out first. So that's still a real thing that's going on in Pennsylvania right now.
Hi, another question from the online audience. From David Torbett.
Okay, I don't know that guy. He's my boss.
Regarding relatively peaceful relations with Delaware and Quaker colonists early on, do we need to have an either-or explanation? Doesn't it make more sense to say both and? Both that Delaware were a peaceful people and that Quakers were more inclined to negotiate peacefully with Native Americans.
Well, from my perspective, William Penn, despite whether it was peaceful or not, is still a colonizer. He still colonized Pennsylvania. Whether he did that in a different way than what had come before, still a colonizer. So, and then we see through like these land purchases, especially because William Penn only came twice, and he was here just briefly. So they had great reverence and great respect for Penn. But then, how far does that go? They use this kind of as a way to gain leverage in negotiation, right? It's like, the peaceful William Penn. They always use this word peaceful or fair and this kind of stuff about William Penn. But in reality, right, is that the Native Americans are manipulating that as well for leverage, right? Better deals or better results for what they're doing. So I don't know what was I lost after the and or thing. I got lost after that.
I'll see if he's good with your answer.
Okay. Ask him if he can simplify it.
Can you give a thumbs up or down?
Yeah.
He also said thank you for the lecture.
He's welcome.
But he kind of had a reverse mortgage.
Yeah. Or his children did, certainly. Yeah, he did. He was one of the wealthiest people, and he dumped everything he had in Pennsylvania. And he died basically in bankruptcy. Right? He went to debtor's prison. And so his sons still lived that lifestyle. And they had debts too, and they needed to pay off land. So they were, in some ways, probably they had a result of this fake treaty that they created. All right, so.
If the historical markers were to be rewritten, how should they be reworded to make it more accurate to what happened? And second part, should other historical markers, like for the Yellow Creek Massacre and the Janadenhutton Massacre that were committed by settlers or by the colonists on Delaware, should those not include the word massacre as well to make it?
Yeah, so I'm not big on erasing history. People put those up for a reason. Like they put it up in the time period that they lived in, and so I'm in favor more of putting up another that would balance it out than actually erasing it or taking it down. Because as you can see, there's a good story there, and for a public historian, right? When you come across stuff like this, there's a good story to tell there, and that's an opportunity. And so I'm not really big on taking things down or destroying them or changing them. More like let's add to it and balance it out. And then now you have a story. And that's that's kind of the issue that in a lot of ways that's going on with the Start Westward Memorial, right? Is how to preserve that and what's the story that's going to be told at the end of the day. So that's the concern for me is the historical public history storytelling of it more so than it is like making it right. So you want to, because in like 30 years from now they'll be like, man, that Downing guy was such a weirdo because because we don't believe any of that stuff today. That's just craziness, right? And so you don't know in 30 years. Who knows what direction we see memorials and monuments and how they're written. And so I think it's better to add than it is to. And usually those things that type of like pursuing that type of correction is people usually you satisfy both sides. As you know, memory and commemoration is very hard to please two sides of that story. But if you add and you have both, then there's a story there that you can tell regardless of what you believe. So be more accurate. Is it David Torbett again?
Yes. He said fine, just looking for nuance on both sides.
Yeah, so basically the same as Wes asked.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? Is that we have that history on their side, right? On that side of things, and so this is to balance that out. I think everyone's getting hungry or something because. Hey, thanks for taking the time out to come down here. Really appreciate it. And hopefully you can take something away from it, and at least from a public history perspective. So thanks again for coming in. Enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend. Watch out for that snow.